Hello. Today we will be figuring and measuring GDP as well as describing the issues, benefits, and limitations with using GDP as insight to the health of the bee movie's bee economy. As this is a study of macroeconomics, not micro, we will be considering the bee economy to be an entire market held within all the beehives of Central Park, New York, and have the human world function as a separate economy. When trying to understand why I don't consider the economic structure of a single beehive, understand that a lone colony of bees is much like a single entity corporation, and when figuring GDP, we tend to do so on a countrywide basis. But wait, we don't even know what the economy of the bee movie is. Well, as we can see from various clips in the movie, the economy is based upon the creation and consumption of one product, honey, and there are no explanations or jobs related to anything else that the bees have. So even though the bees have houses, cars, and things outside of honey, they must be discarded from an economic standpoint because there are no jobs even remotely related to them, and therefore no income generated from them. This is because, unlike the human global economy, the bees do not branch out into different product creations. Instead, they make the product market real simple for us by producing honey the same way every day without any change. Although all of the bees work together to create the same thing, that doesn't mean they don't give various resources based on their jobs to the honey-making process, such as labor or nectar. The resources don't hold any individual value because they aren't traded or used for anything except for honey foraging. Simply put, there is no market for nectar or any other product to be bought, so therefore it is not part of the economy. This is much like how in the modern human economy, metals and especially unrefined versions of resources are nearly worthless until they are used in a process that adds value to them and creates our GDP. Excluding nectar, the only other possibility for there to be another product in the market is pollen or pollination, but this can be easily shut down as it is simply a byproduct of the honey-making process that has no place in the bee economy. In comparison to the human world, pollination would be the same as the smoke produced from a scary factory, except pollination brings positive benefits to the world, while the smoke only does harm. I know what you may be thinking though. The humans buy and sell flowers that need the pollination to survive, so wouldn't the pollination be considered a sort of trade? Well, yes, but also no. The human economy and the bee economy are separate from each other in a monetary sense, and the bee movie is almost solely focused on the bee economy. When we are trying to determine the GDP of the bee economy here, and we come across trades such as this with no financial interactions or profits for the bees, it must be cast aside for the sake of getting through this concept in relation to the movie. Even if you wanted to attach the human economy and the bee economy together in some sort of bee movie universal economy, the bees still would seek no trading of pollen or flowers. This is because from the movie, you never see bees taking pollen or flowers back for trade or any sort of income generation, so it has no capital and cannot even be counted in GDP. Plus, the only cross-species economy shown in the movie is from the slavery of bees to produce honey, which besides not involving pollen or flowers, also generates nothing for the bees. So when understanding the bee economy, pollination and flowers are disregarded as they bring nothing to the market despite flowers being responsible for the gathering of nectar. When talking about how to figure GDP, it is necessary that we understand what the equation is for determining GDP. GDP equals C plus P plus G plus X minus M. C being the amount of money consumers put into the market, P being the amount companies put into the market, G being the amount of money that government introduces into the market, X being the value of exports, and M being the amount of money spent on imports. Essentially, GDP is just the amount of money poured into the market, and so going to other external markets for goods would obviously take away from the money pool and is why M, or imports, is subtracted. So when figuring GDP, there are three ways of going about it. You can do it by expenditure, money spent by the customers, so this could be like Barry purchasing a soda at the vending machine. Another way would be by the value added, so if you have the original price of an item, then with an additional value to generate a profit, like a metal being refined and then increasing the price. And lastly, by income, the amount of money that a consumer or individual takes in, regardless of how they earned it. This is all money that the consumer takes in, their salary, any sort of money. Now, before we go on figuring GDP, we will go over the equation for GDP in the bee economy. First off, the bees neither import or export any products, at least with our consent. And nectar doesn't count as any sort of numeric import because it is valueless until it turns into honey. Next, there doesn't appear to be any government or corporate installation in the bee movie, so there cannot be government or corporate spending. This leaves us with GDP equals the amount of money that consumers spend in the market, C. So literally all of the money added into the bee economy is from the workers and individual bees themselves. That being said, we now know that our best way of figuring the GDP will be through expenditures or income, but for the sake of simplicity, we will do it through income. It appears that the bees are producing to the maximum extent at all times. Thus, their gross domestic product should be in tip-top shape. There are no numbers presented at any time in the movie for me to calculate their GDP exactly, so I will just have to use assumptions based on the real world. Our first step will be to find out how many separate beehives there are in the park, since they all add together to form the bee economy. Now, this is where things will get a little tricky, but with a little research, I found the vague numbers needed to find the number of beehives in New York. Apparently, there are about 80,000 bees in New York State, so in order to find the number of bees in Central Park, I would just use a ratio between the population of the entire state versus the population of New York City. New York State has a population of 19,450,000 people, while New York has only a population of 8,400,000 people. So the 8,400,000 divided by 19,450,000 should get us the ratio to which we can allocate the number of colonies in the city. Okay, so the number we get from the ratio is going to be 0.431877, and that multiplied into the 80,000 colonies of bees puts us at about 34,550 colonies in New York alone, but not in our bee economy of Central Park. To find the amount of bees in Central Park, we will just create another ratio between the landmass of the city and the landmass of the park itself. The city has a size of 302.6 square miles, but the park is only about 1.3 square miles. So our 1.3 square mile park size divided by the 2.6 miles of city lands us with about 0.0043 or 0.43%. And that number multiplied into the amount of colonies that New York City holds gets us almost 149 colonies. So there it is. According to this math, there is about 149 beehives in Central Park. Now, there are about 80,000 working bees per beehive, and because there is about 149 beehives in Central Park where the movie is set, we can start to figure the numbers for the GDP. Well, actually, before we start with the GDP, the population of the park will be 149 times 80,000, landing us with a working population of 11,920,000 since 100% of bees work. Now, since all of the bees are equal in valuations, we can use Barry's home as a reference for every bee in the movie. Barry's home appears to be a working middle-class family home, and even without its looks, it was likely meant to relate to the audience who go to the theaters in 2007 to watch a movie about bees, that audience being the working middle class. Now we are figuring the GDP of the bees based on the income, and because there aren't any numbers provided by the bee movie, the working class person from 2007 will have to suffice. So middle class is defined as 2/3 or double the median income, and the median income of 2007 was $50,233. So 2/3 of that would be $3,488.6, and double would be $100,466. To find the average, we simply add them, then divide by 2. So we add them to get 133,954.6, and then divide it by 2 to end up with 66,977.3. So now that we have the average annual income per bee, we just have to multiply that by the population of Central Park, or everyone who takes part in the bee economy. So 11,920,000 times 66,977.3 will equal us 798,369,416,000, and that is the nominal GDP of the bee economy. So now that I have the nominal GDP, if I had the inflation or deflation rate for my group, I could use it to find the real GDP by adjusting for inflation. But sadly, at the time of making this video, I do not have those numbers and therefore cannot do so. Also, because of the bees are perfectly equal in pay, the per capita math is extremely easy, and it's just going to be 66,977.3 annual income for every single bee. Sometimes the bees have too much money. After the court case, the bees were awarded all of the stolen honey, which caused a large surge in the influx of income and product for every bee. This surge looked great on paper because you want a high income for your GDP, but in reality, the negative effect the excess product and money had on the bee economy was absolutely devastating and sent the hive into a recession. A recession is caused by either demand shock, supply shock, or financial shock. Barry's hive was hit with a massive demand shock when suddenly every single bee had all of the product or honey they could ever need for the rest of their lives and stopped the purchasing or production of goods ever again. The stoppage of production led to a lack of pollination, which drove the plot of the movie and finished up the film with a happy ending where all the bees continued to work in excess despite not having a need for more honey. Transfer payments. There isn't much to talk about in terms of transfer payments which cause issues in the calculations of GDP, except for somehow Barry had money to buy a soda despite never having a true job and never revealed where he got his money. That hints at the fact that somehow he received money from his parents, which was likely doing normal human things like chores, which are not accounted for in income or expenditures. Some limits that we'll go over with GDP in the bee economy. Population. There are an unknown amount of bees living in each hive, and the number must be rounded or assumed from previously studied hives, which can make the per capita GDP a little bit inaccurate. Inequality. This doesn't apply as the bees live in a perfectly balanced communist society. Environment. The production of honey is heavily reliant on the environment, which in this case is the collectible nectar from the flowers. So if the flowers were to die as they did in the ending portion of the movie, the production would come to a complete and sudden stop. Shadow economy. There were colonies of bees being enslaved, and that caused a large amount of currency to be stuck up and unused, which damages the circular flow of money in the bee economy. Benefits with GDP would be everyone in the bee society is perfectly equal in terms of pay. So any average created by the GDP measurements is 100% accurate to all of the populace. We can assume this because when Barry and his friend are initially looking for their jobs, the salaries or hourly payments of these jobs are never listed. Now, to the average viewer, this may fly under the radar, but from someone who is analyzing the economics of the situation, it is reminiscent of a communist society. This is picked up because normally, or as we see in the human world, the job market is very competitive in which jobs or under different careers or corporations can you pay you higher, and this generally starts a sort of auction for how much a business is willing to pay for a skilled worker. But as seen in the job list scene and throughout the Hunex tour, wages or salaries are never mentioned. This alludes to how payment is not a factor in which job you are after, despite the varying degrees of difficulty per job, and is a replication of communist society in which everyone receives the same pay regardless of job skill levels. From what we have seen in the Bee movie and from their extremely high employment rate, we can tell that the movie hosts an example of a perfect economic system. There will never be any need for a change, and no issues will arise if the bees continue to follow this economic strategy. This movie is a showcase of the perfect economic system and highlights all their feats in very subtle ways. It's just a shame they are communist. Perhaps this movie was an attempt at communist propaganda that slid by due to its very slight subliminal messaging, or perhaps not. We'll never truly know for sure.